Okay, you know that moment. You're chatting in English. You understand everything. You can express yourself pretty well. And then the conversation just, it stops.
Yeah.
Like hitting a wall. You're just left there, maybe feeling a bit frustrated, wondering why it's still so hard to keep things flowing, even when you're at a C1 level. Does that sound
Oh,
familiar?
absolutely. It's a really common point for C1 learners.
Yeah.
You've often mastered the mechanics of the language, the grammar, the vocab.
Right.
But that smooth, kind of effortless back and forth, that can still feel just out of reach.
It's like knowing all the notes, but not quite knowing how to play the music together.
Exactly that. A perfect analogy.
Right. So today, that's exactly what we're diving into. We're not just going to rehash basic grammar points.
Right?
We really want to understand why these conversational stalls happen, even when your English is, genuinely advanced. We're talking about the mental juggling act, the unwritten rules of conversation, and maybe even how our own heads can get in the way sometimes.
And the great news is this isn't about needing more vocabulary lists or anything. It's much more about understanding the dynamics of conversation itself. We'll be sharing practical strategies, some shifts in perspective that can really help, and even the stories from other learners who've navigated this exact thing.
So the goal is to help you not just fill those awkward silences,
Right.
but to actually drive conversations with more confidence and, connection.
Precisely. To really engage.
Let's call it the C1 paradox.
Yeah.
You've got the linguistic toolkit, right? The words, the grammar. You can understand complex stuff. Your pronunciation's probably pretty good.
Mm-hmm. You've done the hard work on the language components?
Yet when you're in a real, live, unpredictable chat, maybe one where emotions are involved, it can feel like you're trying to drive a really powerful car, but the parking brake is still slightly on.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating, I think, is that at this C1 level, the obstacles are often less about a lack of language knowledge and more about how we apply what we know in those real-time, spontaneous social interactions.
Okay, so what are some of these maybe less obvious things that trip us up then?
Well, let's start with something we can call the cognitive load barrier. Think about your mental bandwidth. It's a shared resource.
Okay.
If you're focusing too much on getting the grammar perfect, retrieving that exact right word, it leaves less mental space for genuine connection, for spontaneity.
So your brain is trying to do too many things at once. Like understand, formulate, find the word, apply the grammar.
Exactly. It just slows everything down. Your reaction time suffers.
It's like trying to run too many apps on your phone at the same time. Everything just gets sluggish. Okay. What else is contributing to this conversational stall?
Then there's often a lack of explicit conversational strategies. Native speakers, we operate on a kind of conversational autopilot. We use these implicit rules without thinking.
Right, we just do it.
Exactly. But C1 learners often need to consciously map out this autopilot. Think of it like learning the choreography of a dance.
Things like knowing how to effectively ask follow-up questions, how to, expand on your own points naturally, how to smoothly navigate topic changes. These often aren't explicitly taught.
So it's not just about the individual words, but the unspoken rules of how you string them together in this social dance.
Precisely. And closely related to that, I think, is the fear of silence and the pressure to perform.
Oh, yeah.
That urge to fill every single tiny gap. It can lead to rushed or, frankly, superficial responses.
Yeah.
Plus, worrying constantly about sounding smart or, God forbid, making a mistake. That can actually freeze your ability to speak naturally. It creates this huge mental block.
Oh, the pressure. It feels like you have to deliver a mini TED Talk in every casual conversation sometimes.
Exactly that feeling. Then we have insufficient back-channeling and active listening. Now, back-channeling, think of it as the little verbal and nonverbal signals.
The ahas and nods.
Exactly. Right, I see it. The nodding, the eye contact, all those little things that show you're following along, that you're engaged.
Without these signals, the other person might feel like they're talking into a void, and the conversation can just lose momentum because they don't feel heard.
So it's about actively showing you're listening, not just, passively hearing the words.
Absolutely. That's key. Another big factor is limited elaboration skills.
The short answers.
Yes. Those short, factual answers, they just don't give the other person much to work with, do they? You, as a C1 learner, you have the vocabulary and grammar to say more.
Right.
But actually doing it, elaborating consciously, that's a skill you need to develop.
Those one-word or short phrase answers are like conversational dead ends, aren't they?
They really are. They just stop the flow cold. And we absolutely can't overlook cultural differences in communication styles.
That's a huge one.
Yeah. What's considered a natural conversational flow, how much you reveal about yourself, how direct you should be, these things can vary significantly between cultures.
That's such a good point. It's like there's this whole invisible layer of cultural code running underneath every conversation.
There really is.
Yeah.
And then there's the trap of over-reliance on questioning.
The interrogation mode.
Exactly. If you're constantly firing off questions, one after another, without contributing your own thoughts or experiences,
Yeah.
it can feel much more like an interview or, an interrogation than a genuine dialogue.
Right. It puts all the conversational weight, all the effort onto the other person.
It does. And finally, sometimes it simply comes down to a lack of genuine curiosity or preparedness. I mean, if you're not really engaged in the topic, or maybe not that interested in the person you're talking to, or if you just don't have a few conversational threads or topics ready in your back pocket.
It can be tough to keep things going authentically.
Wow. Okay, so it's a really complex mix of reasons why these conversations might stall out, even at a pretty advanced C1 level.
It is. It's multifaceted. But, just recognizing these underlying dynamics, understanding what might be happening, that's the first crucial step towards transforming your conversational experience.
Because the aim isn't just to avoid those awkward silences anymore. It's about creating truly engaging, enjoyable, back-and-forth interactions.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's dig into some solutions. You mentioned core pillars of conversational flow. What are these, fundamental building blocks we need?
Yes. So we can think of mastering conversational flow as being supported by 6 core pillars. And these go beyond just grammatical correctness, right?
Correct.
They really encompass the pragmatic side, the unspoken rules of how we actually use language in social situations, and those psychological elements we've just been touching on.
All right, lay them out for us. What are these 6 essential pillars?
Okay, pillar 1 is proactive listening and engagement. This means being more than just a passive receiver of words.
Right.
It's about actively seeking out opportunities to connect with what's being said, being an active receiver.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Pillar 2 is strategic elaboration and contribution. This focuses on providing enough detail, enough personal insight to genuinely invite further interaction, moving beyond those brief, unhelpful responses.
Definitely a key one for avoiding those conversational dead ends we talked about. Pillar 3.
Pillar 3 is questioning and follow-up mastery. This isn't just about knowing how to ask questions, but knowing how to ask the right kind of questions.
Open-ended ones.
Exactly. Open-ended questions that encourage deeper exploration, not just factual yes-no answers. And crucially, knowing how to effectively delve deeper into what the other person has already shared. Being the curious guide.
So being a curious guide who knows how to keep digging deeper. I like that image. What's 4?
Exactly. Pillar 4 is managing conversational turns and transitions. This covers the mechanics, the sort of traffic rules of conversation.
Okay.
Knowing when it's your turn to speak, how to politely interject if you need to, and how to shift between topics smoothly without, derailing the whole flow. Being the seamless navigator.
The nuts and bolts of keeping the conversation on track, but doing it naturally. Got it. 5.
Precisely. Pillar 5 is emotional and cultural intelligence. This highlights the vital role of understanding and responding to nonverbal cues, adapting to different communication norms, and building rapport by recognizing and respecting those cultural differences, being the empathetic connector.
Connecting with people on that deeper, more nuanced level.
Okay, absolutely. And the final pillar, number 6, is confidence and resilience. This is all about managing that anxiety we mentioned, accepting that minor errors are just a natural part of communicating, and maintaining your composure, your sort of unflappable quality, even if a conversation throws you a curveball.
All right, these sound like really solid, actionable principles. Let's take a closer look at the first one. Proactive listening and engagement, being the active receiver. It's more than just letting the sounds wash over you, right? You have to do something with it.
Exactly. It's about actively listening for what we can call hooks and openings.
Hooks and opening.
Yeah. These are specific words, phrases, maybe ideas that the other person offers up. Things that you can grab onto to make a comment or ask a related question. They're your potential starting points for jumping back into the conversation.
So it's like being mentally poised, ready to catch those conversational threads as they're thrown out. How can we get better at spotting these hooks?
Well, a really practical exercise you can do is this. When you're listening to something passively, maybe a podcast, an interview online, pause it frequently.
Okay.
At each pause, try to quickly identify 2 or 3 potential hooks, things that you could have commented on or asked a follow-up question about if you were actually in that conversation.
Oh, that's a great way to train your ear, or your brain, really, to listen more actively, more strategically. What's another key strategy for being an engaged listener?
Mastering back-channeling. We mentioned it briefly, but it's worth emphasizing. Think of it as providing verbal nods. These are those little verbal and nonverbal signals that show you're paying attention, that you're following along, and importantly, that you're engaged in what's being said. They really encourage the speaker and make them feel genuinely heard.
Okay, give us some concrete examples of these verbal nods. What do they sound like?
Verbally, it's simple things like, right, I see, okay, got it, exactly, wow, really? Maybe even go on or tell me more.
And non-verbally?
Non-verbally, it includes things like nodding your head appropriately, maintaining good eye contact, not staring, but connecting, and maybe leaning in just slightly to show interest.
So it's showing them you're tracking with their thoughts, even if you don't have a full sentence ready to contribute, like that precise second.
Precisely. It keeps the connection alive. And here's an actionable takeaway for you.
Yeah.
In your next English conversation, consciously try to use a verbal back channel, just a or a right, at least once every, say, 15 to 20 seconds. It might feel a bit, I don't know, forced or artificial initially,
Yeah.
but it makes a significant difference in how engaged the other person feels you are.
I can definitely see how that would encourage the speaker, make them feel like you're right there with them.
Okay, what comes next in the realm of active listening?
Next up is reflecting and paraphrasing. Think of this technique as being the understanding mirror.
Yeah.
Occasionally, maybe not constantly, but occasionally rephrase what the other person has just said in your own words. This does 2 things. It confirms that you've understood them correctly, which is important.
Yeah.
And it signals that you've truly processed their message, not just heard it. Plus, bonus, it often prompts them to elaborate even further.
So it's not just parrot fashion repetition, like saying the exact same words back. It's summarizing or reflecting the core meaning of what they've communicated. Got any examples of how to phrase this?
Absolutely. You could say something like, so if I understand correctly, the main challenge you're facing is X. Or perhaps, okay, so it sounds like you had a really interesting, maybe challenging experience with Y. That really validates what the other person has said, makes them feel understood. Another practical tip for our listeners here, how can they practice this?
Yes. In your very next conversation, make a deliberate effort to paraphrase something the other person says at least once. Just find one opportunity. It requires you to really listen intently, process it, and then articulate your understanding back to them. It's great practice.
Okay, so we're listening actively for those hooks, we're using verbal nods to show we're engaged, and we're reflecting back what we've heard to confirm understanding. What's the final piece of this active receiver pillar?
It's all about noticing nonverbal cues, becoming, if you like, the body language reader.
Oh, okay.
Pay close attention to facial expressions, gestures, posture, and maybe even subtle shifts in the speaker's tone of voice. These nonverbal signals often communicate even more than the spoken words.
Right.
And they can give you really valuable insights into their true feelings, their reactions, which should then inform how you respond.
So it's about tuning into the whole communication spectrum, not just the audio track, so to speak.
Exactly, the full picture. And here's a fun exercise to sharpen this particular skill.
Yeah.
Try watching a short video clip of people having a conversation, but watch it with the sound completely off.
Interesting.
Try to guess their emotional state, the dynamics of their interaction, solely based on their body language, their expressions, their gestures. It's a surprisingly effective way to heighten your awareness of these nonverbal cues.
That's fascinating. A bit like being a detective for body language. Okay, we've explored being the active receiver. Now let's move on to the second pillar. Strategic elaboration and contribution, becoming the generative speaker. This is all about escaping those short conversation-killing answers, isn't it?
Precisely. A very, very common reason conversations stall is that one person, often completely unintentionally, provides only these brief, factual responses.
Yeah.
It just leaves the other person with absolutely nothing to build upon. And the thing is, at the C1 level, you definitely have the linguistic resources, the words, the grammar to elaborate. You just need to use them.
So the first key strategy here is to consciously move beyond simple yes-no answers. Always aim to add a little something extra, maybe a reason, an example, or how you feel about it. You described it earlier as providing conversational fodder, which I think is a great way to put it.
It is exactly that. conversational fodder. So for instance, instead of just a quick yes when someone asks if you enjoy coffee,
Right.
try something like, yes, I really enjoy coffee, especially first thing in the morning. There's just something about the smell and the warmth that really helps me feel awake and, focused for the day.
Ah, okay. So suddenly you've introduced morning, smell, warmth, and focused, all potential new avenues for the conversation to explore.
Exactly. You've planted these little seeds, as you say, that the conversation can grow from. Give the other person something concrete to respond to.
Definitely. Actionable tip for this strategy. How can listeners practice this?
Okay, here's a challenge. For the next 5 questions you're asked in English, make a conscious effort to add at least one extra sentence of elaboration to your response, just one extra sentence.
Okay.
It might feel a bit unnatural or forced at first, maybe a bit like you're over-explaining, but it's a really powerful way to develop this crucial habit.
Okay, I'm making a mental note to try that myself. What's another way to be a more generative, a more giving speaker?
Cultivate the and you habit.
Yeah.
We can call this being the reciprocity prompt.
Okay.
After you've shared your own thoughts or you've answered a question, make it almost an automatic reflex to turn the question back to the other person, or at least invite their opinion or perspective.
Why is that so important?
It signals that you're genuinely interested in their perspective, not just talking about yourself, and it keeps that conversational ball nicely in play. It ensures a two-way street.
Right. Examples of how to do this smoothly, naturally.
Oh, very simple additions work best. Things like, what about you? Do you feel the same way? What are your thoughts on that? Or maybe, have you had a similar experience?
It's such a small addition, often just 2 or 3 words, but it really shifts the dynamic, doesn't it? Makes it a much more balanced exchange. Actionable tip here.
Make and you. Or a similar phrase, a near automatic addition to your responses, at least for a while. Practice it until it becomes a completely ingrained natural habit. It's a tiny tweak with a really significant positive impact on flow.
I can totally imagine how that keeps the conversation tennis match going. What's another way we can enrich our contributions, make them more engaging?
By sharing personal anecdotes and examples,
Yeah.
think of yourself perhaps as the relatable storyteller. People connect through stories, through shared experiences, weaving in brief, relevant personal experiences, observations, or examples to illustrate your points makes your contributions much more engaging, more memorable, and frankly, easier for the other person to connect with emotionally.
So it's about bringing your own lived experiences into the conversation, making it more vivid, more human.
Exactly. It has color and personality. So instead of just stating a general fact like learning a new language can be challenging, which is true, but a bit dry, you could share something more specific like, oh yeah, learning a new language can be challenging. I remember this one time I accidentally used completely the wrong word in Spanish and totally misunderstood what someone was asking me. It was quite embarrassing at the time, but actually a really good learning experience in hindsight. See? That little story adds color, vulnerability, and makes you more relatable.
I love that. It makes you seem more approachable, more real, and it definitely opens up opportunities for the other person to share their own similar experiences or ask more about yours. Actionable tip here.
Prepare, maybe just mentally jot down 2 or 3 short, general personal anecdotes about common topics, things like travel, work challenges, hobbies, learning experiences, maybe even funny mishaps. Have them sort of ready in your back pocket, ready to adapt and share when a relevant conversational context comes up.
That's a great idea, having those little stories ready to go in your conversational toolkit. What's the last strategy you wanted to mention for being a generative speaker?
It's about learning to express your opinions and, crucially, justify them. Become the thoughtful contributor.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to share your viewpoint on a topic, but importantly, always try to explain why you hold that view. Give a reason or two. This encourages genuine discussion and exploration, not just simple agreement or disagreement.
So it's not just saying I agree or I disagree, but adding the because part, offering your reasoning.
Precisely. For example, instead of simply saying, yeah, I enjoy working from home, you could elaborate a bit. Actually, I find working from home really beneficial because it allows me much better work-life balance, and honestly, it reduces my daily commute stress quite a bit, which I think ultimately makes me more productive.
Right. You've stated your opinion clearly and provided supporting reasons, work-life balance, reduced stress, productivity. That definitely creates more avenues for the other person to respond and engage with your points. Actionable tip for this one.
Practice expressing your opinions on a variety of everyday topics, maybe current events, movies you've seen, books you've read, and consciously practice supporting them with just 1 or 2 clear reasons. It's about getting comfortable articulating your perspective in a thoughtful, reasoned way.
Okay, fantastic. We've explored how to be an active listener and a generative contributor. Now let's tackle the third pillar: questioning and follow-up mastery, becoming the curious guide. It's not just about asking any questions for the sake of filling silence, but asking the right kind of questions, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is so critical. Many C1 learners, they know how to formulate grammatically perfect questions. That's not the issue.
Right.
But they don't always instinctively ask the types of questions that truly sustain a conversation and encourage deeper engagement from the other person. The key shift here is moving away from relying primarily on closed questions.
The ones that get a yes or no.
Exactly, those yes-no questions.
Yeah.
And instead, embracing open-ended questions much more often.
So it's about asking questions that genuinely invite the other person to share more of their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences. How do we make that switch effectively in practice?
You want to focus on questions that typically begin with words like why, how, what do you think about, tell me more about, in what way, or maybe could you explain a bit more about?
Okay.
These kinds of questions naturally invite longer, more detailed, more thoughtful responses. They encourage the other person to share their perspective, their feelings, their stories. Think of them as the unlocking key to a more in-depth and interesting conversation.
Can you give us a really clear example of how to transform a typical closed question into a more effective open-ended one?
Sure. Let's take a really common one. Did you have a good weekend?
Right, usually gets a, yeah, it was okay.
Exactly. A brief, often conversation-stopping answer. Instead, try asking something like, what was the most enjoyable part of your weekend? Or what did you get up to over the weekend that you found particularly interesting or relaxing?
Yeah. Okay. That subtle change in wording just immediately opens the door for them to share specific details and stories, doesn't it? Makes a huge difference in the potential for further conversation. Actionable tip here.
Before your next planned English conversation, or even just before you expect you might chat with someone, take literally 2 minutes to mentally prepare 3 to 5 potential open-ended questions on general topics you might discuss, things like hobbies, work, travel, current events, future plans. Just having these ready in your mind can help you steer the conversation in a much more engaging direction when the opportunity arises.
That's a great way to feel more prepared and intentional about guiding the conversation. What's another crucial aspect of being a skilled questioner beyond just asking open-ended questions?
Mastering follow-up questions. I would argue, actually, that this is one of the most vital skills for keeping a conversation alive, flowing, and genuinely interesting.
Okay. Why is it so important?
Because when someone shares something with you, you shouldn't just immediately jump to a completely new, unrelated topic. That can feel a bit dismissive. Instead, ask a question that delves deeper into what they just said. Show you were listening. Think of it as performing the deep dive right there in the conversation based on their contribution.
So it's demonstrating genuine interest in what they've already shared and showing that you actually want to learn more about that specific thing. Can you give us an example of how to do this effectively? Maybe a less effective versus a more effective follow-up?
Absolutely. Imagine someone mentions, I recently started learning to play the guitar.
Okay.
A very basic, kind of surface-level follow-up might be, oh, cool, how long have you been playing? Which is okay. It's polite, but still quite factual and limited.
Right.
A better, deeper follow-up would be something like, oh, really? That's interesting. What inspired you to start learning the guitar specifically? Or perhaps, what kind of music are you hoping you'll eventually be able to play? Or even, what's been the most challenging part of learning it so far? See how these questions encourage them to share more of their personal experience, their motivations, their feelings about it.
Yeah, definitely. It shows you are truly listening to the guitar part and are genuinely curious about their personal journey with it. Actionable tip for developing this key skill.
In your next few conversations, make a very conscious effort to ask at least 2 follow-up questions for every significant piece of information the other person shares. Aim for 2.
2 follow-ups, okay.
It might feel a bit deliberate or structured at first, almost like a rule you're following, but it's incredibly effective in maintaining conversational momentum and showing genuine interest.
Okay, aim for 2 follow-ups noted. What's another type of question that can be really powerful in building connection, moving beyond just information exchange?
Questions that ask for feelings and opinions. These are so important because they help you move beyond just the factual layer of the conversation and tap into the emotional landscape, the other person's personal perspective, their take on things. It's about fostering the emotional connection within the conversation.
Examples of these kinds of feeling or opinion-seeking questions?
You could ask things quite directly, like, how did that make you feel? Or what's your honest opinion on that situation? Or perhaps something slightly more nuanced, like, were you surprised by that outcome? Or maybe even a little disappointed?
These questions really invite a more personal, maybe even vulnerable and revealing response, don't they? Actionable tip here.
Practice consciously looking for opportunities to ask questions that elicit emotions or opinions, rather than just sticking to factual details. It's about intentionally trying to connect with the human element, the person behind the facts, in the conversation.
And finally, thinking about different types of questions. What's the last one in our Curious Guide toolkit?
Let's talk about what if and imagine if questions. These are fantastic tools for injecting some energy, some creativity, maybe even some fun into a conversation, especially if it feels like it's starting to plateau or get a bit repetitive.
Okay.
They invite speculation, they encourage imaginative thinking, and they can lead to some really interesting and unexpected conversational turns. They position you as the hypothetical explorer.
Examples of how we might use these speculative questions in a conversation.
Well, they can be serious or playful. You could ask something like, what if remote work became the permanent norm for most industries? What do you think the biggest societal impact would be? Or something more lighthearted like, imagine if you could have any superpower, what would it be? And more importantly, why? These kinds of questions can really spark some engaging and often quite revealing responses.
That's a great way to inject some fresh energy and possibility into the conversation, shift the mood, maybe. Actionable tip for this.
Just keep a few potential what if or imagine if scenarios tucked away in your mind. They don't have to be profound. They can be real conversation savers when things start to feel a bit stagnant or you're running out of obvious follow-up questions.
Fantastic. All right, we've covered the what of conversation listening, contributing, asking questions. Now let's move on to the how, the mechanics, with our fourth pillar, managing conversational turns and transitions, becoming the seamless navigator. This is about knowing when to speak and how to move between topics gracefully, right? The flow.
Exactly. Beyond what you say, how you manage the actual flow, the rhythm, the give and take of the conversation is absolutely crucial for smoothness. The first strategy here is learning to recognize and use turn-taking cues.
Okay, what are those exactly?
Native speakers use these often quite subtle verbal and nonverbal signals to indicate when they're about to finish speaking or when they're actively inviting you to respond or take a turn.
What kind of specific cues should we be looking and listening for?
Verbally, it might be things like their voice trailing off slightly at the end of a sentence, or a noticeable pause, or asking a direct question to you, or using a concluding phrase like, so yeah, or yum,
Okay, and non-verbally?
Non-verbally, they might make direct eye contact with you expectantly, perhaps shift their posture slightly towards you, or use a relaxed open hand gesture. These often signal your turn.
So it's about becoming really attuned to these often missed signals, reading the subtle invitation to speak. Actionable tip for developing this sensitivity.
Make a conscious effort to observe native speakers when they're in conversation with each other. Pay attention. When do they take their turns? What specific verbal and nonverbal signals do they seem to use just before they start or stop speaking? Then, try to subtly mirror some of these cues in your own interactions. It's about developing that intuitive sense of conversational timing and rhythm.
That makes perfect sense. Observation and gentle imitation. Now, what if you have something relevant to contribute, but the other person is still talking? You don't want to interrupt rudely, but you also don't want to lose your thought.
Ah, yes. That's where learning to interject politely comes in. You need to become skilled as the gentle interrupter.
Okay.
There are specific, graceful phrases you can use to get your point across or signal you have something to add without being disruptive or seeming rude.
Give us some examples of these polite interjection phrases. What can we actually say?
Simple, effective phrases work well. Things like, excuse me for just a moment, but, or if I could just add something quickly here, or may I jump in for just a second, or even a softer, sorry to interrupt, but that just made me think.
I imagine the tone of voice is probably just as important as the words themselves in these situations, right? You don't want to sound abrupt.
Oh, absolutely crucial. You need to deliver these phrases with a polite, perhaps slightly apologetic, and non-demanding intonation to really soften the interruption. Actionable tip, actually practice saying these phrases out loud, maybe recording yourself until they feel natural and comfortable coming out of your mouth. Pay close attention to your intonation as you practice.
Okay, gentle interjections are key for participating smoothly without derailing things. Now, what about when a topic seems to have naturally run its course, or maybe you consciously want to steer the conversation in a slightly new direction? How do you do that without it feeling abrupt?
That's where mastering topic shifting and bridging comes into play. You want to become the agile connector. Avoid just suddenly changing the subject out of the blue, which can feel jarring.
Right.
Instead, use what we call bridging phrases to create a much more natural, smoother transition between the current topic and the new one you want to introduce.
Okay, examples of these helpful bridging phrases, what do they sound like?
You could use things like, oh, that reminds me of, or speaking of X, have you heard about Y? Or maybe, that's really interesting. On a slightly different note, I was wondering. Or even just changing gears for a moment.
These phrases act like little signposts in the conversation, don't they? Gently guiding the other person along to the new topic. Actionable tip for this.
Identify maybe 3 or 4 bridging phrases that you feel comfortable and natural using, and then actively practice incorporating them into your practice conversations, or even just mentally rehearse using them. The goal is to make those topic shifts feel seamless and logical.
And finally, in terms of managing the mechanics, the flow of conversation, what's the last piece of the puzzle in this pillar?
It's about controlling your pace, finding a comfortable and clear speaking pace. Speaking too quickly can make it difficult for others to follow you, especially non-native speakers.
Yeah.
While speaking too slowly or hesitantly can sometimes signal uncertainty or lack of confidence, you want to strive to be the steady talker.
So finding that natural, comfortable rhythm and avoiding the extremes, actionable tip here, how can someone work on their pacing?
A really good technique is to try recording yourself speaking English, maybe just talking about your day or a topic you know well. Then listen back honestly. Assess if your pace tends to be too rapid, maybe a bit breathless, or perhaps too slow and deliberate. Practice consciously adjusting it. And crucially, remember this: strategic pauses are perfectly okay. In fact, they can be very effective for emphasis, for allowing others to process what you've just said, and for gathering your own thoughts. Don't be afraid of a well-placed pause.
Okay, pacing is definitely something to be mindful of. Great advice. Now, let's move to our 5th pillar, which sounds really interesting. Emotional and cultural intelligence becoming the empathetic connector. This is about understanding all the nuances of human interaction that go beyond just the literal meaning of the words being used, right?
Exactly. Truly effective, meaningful conversation relies heavily on your ability to understand and connect with people on both an emotional and a cultural level. The first key strategy here is to actively work on developing empathy. Strive to become the feeling responder.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means trying to genuinely understand the other person's perspective, and maybe more importantly, tuning into their underlying emotions. Then, respond not just to the surface meaning of their words, but also acknowledge or address the feelings they might be expressing, explicitly or implicitly.
How can we actually put this into practice in our conversations? Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say someone tells you, ugh, I'm feeling really overwhelmed with this new project at work lately.
Okay.
Instead of just a neutral, perhaps slightly dismissive response like, oh, that's too bad, try saying something that shows you've heard the emotion. Maybe, wow, that sounds really stressful. What aspects of the project are feeling particularly overwhelming right now? See? This acknowledges they're feeling stressful and invites them to elaborate further on their experience.
Right. It validates their feeling and shows you care enough to ask for more detail. Actionable tip for developing this empathetic response.
In your upcoming conversations, make a conscious effort to actively listen for the potential underlying emotion the other person might be expressing. Are they hinting at happiness, frustration, excitement, worry, confusion? Try to identify it and then find a way to gently acknowledge that emotion in your response.
So it's about tuning into their emotional state and responding thoughtfully to that, not just the facts. Okay, what about the cultural dimension of this pillar? How does that play out?
That's where we need to observe and adapt to cultural communication styles. You need to become a bit of the cultural chameleon.
Okay.
This means doing a bit of research, maybe, but mostly paying close attention to the typical communication norms of the specific cultures you interact with frequently. As we touched on earlier, things like the appropriate level of directness versus indirectness,
Right.
the acceptability of interrupting or overlapping speech, the amount of eye contact that feels comfortable and normal, the degree of personal information people typically disclose in casual conversation. All these can vary quite significantly between cultures.
So it's about being aware, observant, and respectful of these often subtle differences in conversational etiquette. Actionable tip here. How can we get better at this?
If you frequently interact with people from a particular culture, maybe colleagues, friends, clients, dedicate a little bit of time to reading up on their general communication styles. There's lots of information available online. But even more importantly, pay close attention to how people from that culture interact with each other. Observe their patterns. It's all about keen observation and then learning to adapt your own communication approach respectfully and appropriately when you're interacting with them.
And finally, regarding this pillar of emotional and cultural intelligence, what's the last key strategy you wanted to highlight?
It's about learning to use humor appropriately.
Yeah.
Humor can be a absolutely fantastic way to build rapport, ease tension, and connect with people, being the light touch in a conversation.
I sense a but coming.
But yes, exactly. Humor is also deeply, deeply cultural and often relies on very subtle linguistic nuances, shared background knowledge, and timing that can be easily missed or misinterpreted by language learners, even at a C1 level.
Right. Jokes can fall very flat or worse, be offensive if you misunderstand the cultural context.
Precisely. So while at a C1 level, you likely have a good grasp of some common types of English humor, and you can definitely aim to use simple, generally safe forms of humor, the crucial word here, as you anticipated, is appropriately.
So what's the advice? Err on the side of caution.
Absolutely. When in doubt, it's always wise to err on the side of caution. Avoid jokes that might be potentially offensive, rely on very specific cultural references you're not 100% sure the other person will get, or are overly complex or sarcastic, as sarcasm can be particularly tricky.
Any safer types of humor?
Well, self-deprecating humor making light, gentle fun of yourself or a minor mistake you made is often a relatively safe and relatable option in many English-speaking contexts. But again, sensitivity is key.
Good advice. Humor. Use with care and cultural awareness. Okay, let's move to our final but hugely important pillar. Confidence and resilience becoming the unflappable communicator. Anxiety can be a real conversation killer, can it? Especially when speaking a non-native language.
It absolutely can be. It can shut you down completely.
Yeah.
The first and maybe the most crucial strategy here is to consciously embrace imperfection. You need to actively adopt the growth mindset.
Okay.
The fear of making mistakes, of not sounding perfect, is probably the single biggest hurdle for many advanced learners. But remember this, even native speakers make errors, stumble over words, and have awkward pauses in spontaneous speech. It happens all the time.
Right, we're not perfectly scripted robots.
Exactly. So focus on your primary goal, which should be effective communication, getting your message across clearly, not on achieving flawless, unattainable perfection. Every little slip-up, every moment you search for a word is actually a learning opportunity, not a failure.
So it's about fundamentally reframing those moments when you misspeak or can't instantly find the perfect word. What's a helpful mantra someone could keep in mind?
How about this? My aim is to communicate my message clearly and connect with this person, not to speak perfectly. Something simple like that.
I like that. Communication over perfection. Actionable tip for this mindset shift.
Actively challenge yourself when you catch yourself engaging in that negative self-talk after making a mistake. Notice it. Then consciously replace that overly self-critical thought, oh, that sounded so stupid, with a more constructive one. Okay, I used the wrong preposition there. Good to remember for next time, but they still understood my main point. It's about self-correction, not self-flagellation.
Right, catching that inner critic and replacing it with a coach. I like that shift in perspective. What's another powerful way to build conversational confidence, maybe feel a bit more prepared?
By preparing some go-to topics. Think of these as your personal conversational anchors. Have a few subjects ready in your mind that you are genuinely interested in, feel reasonably knowledgeable about, and ideally enjoy talking about. These could be your hobbies, a recent interesting news story that caught your attention, a memorable trip you've taken, something fascinating you're learning about.
Why is this helpful?
It just gives you something reliable and comfortable to draw upon when a conversation naturally lulls, or when you want to proactively initiate a new topic but feel a bit blank. It reduces that on-the-spot pressure.
So having some reliable conversational material ready in the background, ready to deploy. Actionable tip for this?
Yes. Take 5 minutes sometime this week and actually create a short list, maybe just 3 to 5 bullet points of your personal conversation starters or revivers, topics you feel comfortable and enthusiastic discussing. Just having these consciously in mind can significantly boost your confidence going into social situations.
That's a great practical way to feel more prepared and less reliant on having to think entirely on your feet all the time. What else can contribute to building stronger confidence for conversations?
Try actively visualizing success. Engage in what psychologists sometimes call mental rehearsal.
Okay, how does that work?
Before a conversation that you anticipate might be a bit nerve-wracking, maybe a job interview, a networking event, even just meeting new people, take a few quiet moments beforehand to mentally picture yourself participating confidently. Imagine yourself listening attentively, contributing smoothly, asking good questions, handling pauses gracefully. This kind of positive mental preparation can genuinely help to reduce anxiety and boost your self-assurance when the real situation arrives.
It's like a mental warm-up for the conversation, setting a positive intention. What about when you inevitably do make a mistake right there in the middle of a conversation? How should you handle that?
That's where practicing self-correction gracefully comes in. You want to aim to be the smooth recovery expert. If you realize you've made an error, used the wrong word, mispronounced something, made a grammatical slip, don't dwell on it, don't get visibly flustered if you can help it. The key is to correct it quickly and smoothly, and then immediately continue with what you were saying. This demonstrates competence and control, paradoxically.
Any examples of how to do this quickly and without drawing too much unnecessary attention to the mistake?
Oh, simple, brief phrases work best. Something like, sorry, I meant to say effect, not effect, or my apologies, I misspoke there. I meant to suggest that. Just a quick, clear correction, maybe a small smile, and then seamlessly keep the conversational flow going. Don't make a big deal out of it.
Got it. Acknowledge the slip-up briefly, correct it, and move right on without overthinking it or apologizing profusely. What's another key strategy for building resilience, especially when feeling anxious?
Focus outward, not inward. This is huge. When you're feeling anxious in a conversation, your attention naturally tends to turn inwards. You start monitoring yourself intensely. Am I sounding foolish? Are they judging my grammar? What should I say next?
Oh yeah, that internal monologue can be paralyzing.
It really can. So consciously try to shift your focus outward onto the other person. What are they saying? What does their body language suggest they might be feeling? How can you show them that you are truly listening and engaged with their contribution? This deliberate, other-centered approach can significantly reduce your own self-consciousness and anxiety.
That makes perfect sense. Taking the mental spotlight off yourself and shining it onto the interaction and the other person instead. And the final strategy you wanted to share for becoming a more unflappable communicator.
It's about actively seeking and using feedback constructively. If you have trusted sources, maybe good friends who are native speakers, a language tutor, reliable language exchange partners, don't be afraid to ask them for specific, honest feedback on your conversational flow.
What kind of specific questions could someone ask?
You could ask things like, did you notice if I interrupted too much during our chat earlier? Or were there times when my answer seemed a bit too short and maybe shut down the conversation? Or was my pacing generally comfortable to follow? Use their feedback, the constructive parts anyway, as valuable insights to identify specific areas where you can focus your efforts to improve.
That's invaluable, getting that honest outside perspective on your actual conversational habits, not just your grammar knowledge. All right, these 6 pillars provide a really comprehensive, actionable framework. Now, you mentioned earlier some inspiring real-world stories from actual learners who've successfully tackled these very challenges. I'm really keen to hear those now.
Absolutely. I think hearing from others who have faced similar frustrations and then found effective strategies that worked for them can be incredibly motivating and offer very practical, relatable insights.
Okay, first up, we have Clara Schmidt from Germany. What was her main conversational hurdle? What did she struggle with?
Clara realized, through feedback actually, that she had developed a tendency to unintentionally turn her conversations into what felt like interrogations to the other person.
Ah, the over-reliance on questioning we talked about.
Exactly. She was asking a lot of questions, showing interest that way, but she wasn't contributing enough of her own thoughts, feelings, or experiences in return.
So the conversational burden, the work, was falling largely on the other person to keep providing the content.
Okay. What were her breakthrough strategies? How did she change this pattern?
She consciously implemented a simple rule for herself, which she called the me then you rule.
Me, then you.
Okay.
Before asking her next question, she made it a point to first briefly share a related thought, a feeling, or a short personal experience of her own that connected to what had just been said.
Ah, adding her own contribution before asking for theirs.
Precisely. She also made a deliberate effort based on our earlier points, to ask more why and how questions, moving beyond just factual inquiries. And she started actively listening for what she called echoes, keywords or ideas the other person mentioned that she could then consciously build upon or relate back to with her own input. This combination really helped her shift from simply extracting information to truly co-creating a more balanced give-and-take dialogue.
That me, then you rule sounds like a really effective and easy to remember technique for ensuring a more reciprocal conversation. Love that. Who's our next inspiring story?
Next, we have Jae-hoon Park from South Korea. His challenge was a bit different. Even though his grammatical English was actually very strong, very accurate, he often felt that native speakers sometimes seemed to lose interest during conversations, or would occasionally cut the conversation short, and he couldn't figure out why.
What was the underlying issue there, do you think, if his language was good?
He came to realize, again, partly through observation and feedback, that he wasn't providing enough of those active listening signals, the back-channeling cues that we discussed earlier.
The ums and nods.
Exactly. In Korean culture, as in some others, extended periods of silent listening can sometimes have different connotations, perhaps signaling respect or deep thought. But in many fast-paced English-speaking contexts, that sustained silence from the listener can occasionally be misinterpreted as disengagement, confusion, or a lack of understanding, causing the speaker to trail off.
Okay, so what specific practical changes did he make to address this cultural communication difference?
He consciously began to pepper his listening with more verbal back-channeling cues, strategically placed. Right? Okay. I see. Just to signal he was actively following along. He also made a deliberate point of increasing his eye contact and nodding more frequently and naturally. Additionally, he practiced using those polite interjection phrases we talked about so that he could participate more actively in the flow without feeling like he was being rude or interrupting inappropriately. He found that focusing on these seemingly small conversational manners made a surprisingly significant difference in how engaged and connected the people he was speaking with seemed to feel.
It's really fascinating, isn't it, how those subtle, often subconscious cues can have such a profound impact on the overall energy, flow, and feeling of engagement in a conversation. Okay, our next story is from Aisha Rahman in Bangladesh. What was her primary struggle with conversational flow?
Aisha's situation was that her conversations in English were often very informative, very clear, and she could convey complex information effectively, especially in professional contexts. But she felt that they sometimes lacked a certain warmth, a personal connection. She could exchange facts and ideas quite well, but she wanted to build stronger rapport, a better personal connection with the people she was talking to.
So it was less about clarity and more about connection. How did she manage to bridge that gap and inject more warmth and personality into her interactions?
She took a couple of key steps. First, she intentionally developed what she described as her short anecdote toolkit, basically. A collection of brief, relatable personal stories about her daily life, her work experiences, aspects of her culture, things she found funny that she could weave into relevant points in the conversation naturally.
Using those relatable storyteller skills.
Exactly. Second, she made a conscious effort to explicitly verbalize empathy when the situation seemed to call for it. She started using phrases like, "Oh, that sounds incredibly difficult," or "I can only imagine how frustrating that must have been for you." Just directly acknowledging the other person's likely feelings. And finally, linked to that, she started consciously asking more questions, specifically about the other person's feelings and opinions, not just the facts questions like, "How did that make you feel?" or "What was going through your mind then?" This combination helped her connect with people on a much more emotional and human level, moving beyond just the efficient exchange of information.
It really highlights the importance, doesn't it, of bringing your whole self, your personality, your empathy into the conversation and showing genuine care for the other person's inner experience. Okay, our final inspiring story is from Leonardo Rossi in Italy. What was his main challenge?
Leonardo was interesting because he had achieved a really impressive C1 level of English proficiency. On paper, great grammar, wide vocabulary, but he often felt intensely anxious in actual social speaking situations. He found himself struggling to participate spontaneously and confidently in group conversations especially. He often described feeling more like a spectator watching the conversation happen than an active participant in it.
That anxiety barrier again, freezing him up despite his skills. So how did he manage to overcome that anxiety and become a more active and confident participant in real-time conversations?
Leonardo's journey was largely about a combination of shifting his mindset and actively seeking out the right kinds of exposure and practice. First, he made a conscious effort to reframe his perspective on mistakes, really internalizing the idea that they weren't failures, but just essential, unavoidable learning opportunities.
Embracing imperfection.
Yes, embracing imperfection. He focused on quickly correcting any errors he made and then immediately moving on mentally, without dwelling on them or letting them derail his confidence. Second, he made a point of actively listening to lots of unscripted English content, things like podcasts, informal interviews, reality TV specifically, to better observe the natural, messy flow and rhythm of real conversations, including pauses and overlaps.
Immersing himself in authentic speech patterns.
Exactly. Third, he gave himself a daily personal challenge, the 5-minute talk, where he would just speak continuously, alone, about any random topic that came to mind for 5 minutes straight, just to build his fluency, spontaneity, and comfort with speaking off the cuff. And crucially, fourth, he joined a supportive online speaking club, a group where he felt safe to practice speaking, take risks, and make mistakes without any fear of judgment. This consistent practice in a low-pressure, encouraging environment was hugely beneficial in building his real-world conversational confidence over time.
These are all such valuable, practical lessons and really inspiring stories. It truly emphasizes that improving conversational flow, even at an advanced C1 level, is absolutely a skill. It's something that can be learned, deliberately developed, and actively practiced with the right strategies and mindset. Now, for those C1 learners listening who are really looking to elevate their conversational game even further, to go from good to great, what advanced tips do you have to share?
Okay, absolutely. For those aiming to go beyond just proficient and become truly exceptional, really engaging conversationalists in English, here are a few more advanced strategies to consider layering on top of the pillars we've discussed. First, work on mastering the subtle art of transitioning smoothly from small talk to big talk.
Okay.
Learn how to navigate gracefully beyond those initial pleasantries, the weather. How was your weekend, to genuinely discover shared interests, and then gently probe deeper into more substantive, meaningful, and engaging discussions when the context feels right.
That delicate dance of moving beyond the superficial to something more connecting. I like that.
Exactly. Second, start to consciously develop your unique conversational persona. Think about how you want to come across when speaking English. Do you want to be known more for your wit, your insightful analysis, your empathy, your storytelling? Intentionally work on cultivating your own distinctive style, including your characteristic use of humor, the types of stories you tell, and even your specific vocabulary choices.
So being more intentional about the impression you make and the particular role you tend to play in conversations. Interesting.
Precisely. Third, become highly skilled at reading the room, especially in group conversations. This is a very advanced skill. Pay close attention to the unspoken dynamics, who seems to be naturally more dominant in the conversation, who is tending to be quieter, maybe struggling to get a word in. And then think about how you can actively facilitate a more inclusive and balanced discussion, perhaps by gently drawing in those who haven't had a chance to speak, or by summarizing different viewpoints.
That's a real mark of conversational maturity and leadership, isn't it? Being aware of the group dynamic?
Indeed. Fourth, related to that, practice the art of active summarization during group discussions. Occasionally, especially if a discussion becomes complex or goes off on tangents, offer a brief, clear, and concise recap of the key points that have been made so far. This helps ensure clarity, confirms shared understanding, and also demonstrates your active engagement and comprehension to everyone involved.
That's a great way to provide value, show leadership, and keep everyone effectively on the same page.
It is. Fifth, at a C1 level, you can begin to subtly and appropriately incorporate rhetorical devices into your speech. Things like well-placed rhetorical questions, using parallelism for emphasis, maybe even a relevant metaphor or analogy. Used sparingly, these can make your points more impactful, engaging, and memorable.
Adding a little bit of linguistic flair and persuasive power when appropriate. Okay.
Exactly. Sixth, strive to engage in deep listening. This goes beyond simply understanding the literal words being spoken. It involves trying to truly grasp the speaker's underlying beliefs, their values, their assumptions, their intentions, the subtext. This deeper level of comprehension allows for much more thoughtful, nuanced, and empathetic responses.
Listening not just with your ears, but with your whole understanding of context and motivation.
Indeed. Seventh, this is an interesting one. Take some time to reflect on your own natural communication style in your native language. What are your inherent strengths as a communicator back home? What are your typical weaknesses or blind spots? Understanding these natural tendencies can provide really valuable insights into how you might need to adapt, enhance, or even leverage them consciously in your English conversations.
That's a really insightful point, looking inwards at your baseline communication habits to understand your starting point.
And finally, eighth, for proactive practice, create conversation scenarios. Practice list. Think about various challenging or common social or professional situations you might encounter, networking events, difficult conversations, casual gatherings with new people, debates on familiar topics. Mentally rehearse or even role-play how you would ideally initiate, maintain, navigate challenges within, and gracefully conclude conversations in each of those specific contexts.
Like doing mental role-playing or flight simulations for conversations to prepare for different social situations. All fantastic advanced tips for really taking those conversational skills to the next level.
Ultimately, I think the fundamental takeaway here is that for C1 English learners, truly improving conversational flow, getting past that plateau, isn't just about accumulating more vocabulary or mastering ever more complex grammar points. It's fundamentally about mastering the art of human connection through conversation itself.
Right.
It's this dynamic interplay of proactive listening, strategic contribution, genuine empathetic engagement, cultural awareness, and confident self-management.
So it really is about the whole multifaceted package of communication skills working together, not just isolated language knowledge.
Absolutely. And I would wholeheartedly encourage you, our listener, to embrace each and every conversation you have in English, no matter how small, as a valuable opportunity. An opportunity to actively practice these skills we've discussed, to connect more meaningfully with others, and to continue on your amazing journey of both language development and interpersonal growth.
Because the ultimate aim, as you said, is to move beyond merely preventing those awkward silences.
Right.
And to truly cultivate those genuine, engaging, often rewarding human interactions that really keep the spark of connection alive.
And the encouraging part is, with consistent effort and a thoughtful, strategic approach using some of these ideas, you absolutely will not only keep those conversations going more easily, but you'll be able to elevate them into truly meaningful, enjoyable, and often seemingly effortless exchanges over time.
And that brings us perfectly to our final thought for you today, something to mull over. Think about your own communication style, your habits in your native language. What specific aspects of that style might you consciously choose to adapt or perhaps enhance to enrich your English conversations? And looking ahead, what's one specific go-to topic, maybe from that list you'll create, that you'll actively prepare and plan to bring to your very next interaction in English?
Great questions to ponder.
Mull that over, maybe jot down some thoughts, and we'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.